do I remember correctly that you're from Eudora?
That's correct, Eudora, Arkansas.
Okay, now if I remember Eudora, it is far in the southeastern corner of Arkansas.
Right, it is as far as you can get in the southeast.
So how did you even hear about Ouachita?
Well, there was a couple, in fact they were twins, that attended Ouachita. And that was my only, real knowledge about Ouachita. I had never been to Ouachita's campus when I arrived here. But I did talk to them, and I talked to. I tell you, one of the main introductions to Ouachita was that we did go to the camps in Siloam Springs, and the one around Little Rock somewhere, and they would sing Ouachita, and they always had a group of Ouachita, students, and I don't know whether they were counselors or what, but man, they would be popping in and out and up and down, and they sang Ouachita, and so that was, a good way to say, well, what is this? What is it? Where is it? And then these twins went to Ouachita, and their father, who I worked for with the AP&L, and for a short time in the summers, and that's another story in itself. I tried to climb a few poles and fell a few times, but I decided that I wanted to attend Ouachita, and I had the opportunity to attend. I don't know how much depth we need on this, but I was invited to the University of Arkansas along with this friend of mine from McGee, and I think he was the main player. Now, when we were at the University of Arkansas, they gave us shirts, and I think I got shirts because he got shirts, and it wasn't because of my ability in football, but K.O. Dotley was this young man's name in McGee. And but after talking with them, they offered me scholarships at all the junior colleges at the time, and they really wanted him, at the University of Arkansas. But he chose later on to go to Ole Miss. And but I told them at the time, I said, well, I appreciate the trip, but I'm planning to go to Ouachita anyhow, and then started making my plans to do so. And Mr. Ed Harper. Now, my father could have taken me, I'm sure, but Mr. Ed Harper was going to take his twins to Arkadelphia. And I asked him, I said, Mr. Ed, would you mind me going with you? And he said, no, it'd be fine. Well, I thought he had a car, but he didn't. He had a pickup truck. And so I rode in the back of the pickup truck. And I made my jaunt from Eudora up here, and there were no paved roads from there to here at that particular time. And one of the guys I worked with went with us also, and we had a time. But anyhow.
You picked up some dust along the way.
Oh, we did. And then I arrived here, and I would tell you, by the time I got here, I was ready to go back home. And I was told when I went up here, I didn't know you had to write here and tell them you were coming or sign up or, anything like that. I just was going to Ouachita. And so when I arrived, they said, well, we don't have any more rooms for you. I said, that's fine, don't you worry about it. I've got a ride back home. And I told Mr. Ed Harper that. He said, no, we I said, no, Mr. Ed. Said, I told him my dad needed me on the farm anyhow. And so Mr. Ed went to the president's home, which was located here on campus. And he knocked on his back door, and Dr. Grant, the old Dr. Grant, came out. And he said, well, what have we here? And Mr. Ed Harper told him, and I was standing behind Mr. This is just like yesterday. I was standing behind Mr. Harper and facing Dr. Grant. And as he said, I've got a boy here that they tell me doesn't have a room, and I want this boy to be up here. And I'm standing behind Mr. Ed, giving it that to Dr. Grant. No, I don't want to stay, But anyhow, we'll find a place for that young man, don't you worry. Well, I was placed as the fourth person in a two-man room. So we had two double bunks, and that was another experience. But anyhow, that's how I got my start. And then I said, where do you check in for football? They said, well, the gym's over there. And I went over there and I said, well, I'd like to try to play football. And they said, well, football's been going on for about 2 weeks. I said, well, I didn't know that you started, practicing before school started. And he said, well, that's right, son. We do. So he said, well, come on out. And the first day I was out there, Mr. Bill Walton he was not the head coach, but he was the advisory coach. And he walked down to where I was, and he stopped practice, and he said, all right, you guys, in his real shrill voice, he said, this is Bill Vining. He's just out of high school. You all take it easy on him. Well, as I looked around, I was kind of glad he said that, because, man, all the guys, that were there were back from the Army. They had already served in World War II, and most of them are seniors, and they were some big tough guys. I'll tell you this funny story here, and you do what you want to with it. But okay, they put me on defensive end. So I was on the left defensive end, and a guy named Moore was the defensive tackle. And he was a mountain of a guy. So I skirted around him, and I got back in the backfield and made the tackle. And nothing was said. And I did it again. And on my way back to the line, he grabbed me by the shirt collar and pulled me up, face to face. He said, let me tell you something, boy. He said, we don't do that in practice. Said, we save that for the game. I said, yes, sir. And they were old enough for me to call him Mister. So my freshman year in football was almost a waste of time, because we must have had 15 ends, and I was probably number 14 or 15. And the only reason I was one better than the other, because that guy broke his leg, and so he was dismissed from the squad. So, but it was a tough run for football. And then I chose the next year not to play football, because I had made a scholarship in basketball. So when basketball season rolled around, then I went out for basketball. And I had gotten to know the ropes a little bit better. And in fact, I was the only guy, out of the top 10 that was not a veteran. And I'm not saying I was that good a player, because it looked to me like every time somebody, in my position, would foul out or get hurt, they'd always move another guy, from the forward into that post position. Anyhow, but I told him one day, I told Coach, I said, Coach, why don't you, and we had a third and fourth team, that really played a schedule.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I was missing all of that because I was playing very little. And I asked Coach, I said, Coach, why don't you put me on the third team? Oh, no, you're doing well. Named Bradshaw. He said, you're doing great. I said, well, Coach, I'm not playing any. He said, oh, yeah, you're playing a little bit, and that's what it's going to take. So, anyhow, he was our basketball coach, and then I went in to talk to him about basketball. And I said, after we'd practiced for a while, I said, Coach, I'd like to talk to you about scholarship. And he looked over to the assistant coach, who had been really working us out because Bradshaw had just, come in at midterm. He said, well, what do you think, Bullo? Bullo was Marcus Kaufman, and was a coach, assistant coach here at the time. And he said, I believe he deserves it. He said, that's fine. Put him on scholarship. I said, that's great. I said, by the way, I paid for my tuition and fees the first semester. Do I get it also? Do you pay me back for that? He said, no, son, we can't help you there, but we'll help you from this point on. Yeah. So, but I said, well, it's worth trying. Yeah. So, but from that point on, I stayed with basketball. And then I know the following year, I did not go out for football because I was the only player returning in basketball from the previous year because all the veterans had completed. I'm trying to think of Bobby. Oh, goodness. There's a couple of them you would know. Oh dear. Anyhow.
So at what point did you decide you wanted to coach basketball?
Well, I really did not make a decision about coaching, but I did decide that I would major in both physical education and mathematics. Okay. And so I said, this will prepare me probably for coaching as well as if it's coaching or if it's teaching or, if I decide to do something in mathematics and, and go from there. So.
Now, in your early coaching days, didn't you coach football as well as basketball?
Yes. And
that was at Ouachita?
That was Ouachita, yeah. Ouachita is the only place I've ever worked. I've tried to, as I told people, I've tried to get a job, but I never could. Yeah. But
who was the head football coach when you were the assistant?
Rab Rogers. And Rab was also the head coach my senior year in football. By the way, I went back to football my junior year. They kind of pulled a trick on me because Rab became the coach my sophomore year. And so for football and basketball.
Oh, okay.
And then he told me one day, he said, I want you to dress out at this football game. I said, wait a minute, Coach. I said, you talking to a guy that been out a day. He said, it doesn't matter. I just want you to dress out. I need some numbers out there. And so I don't know who was playing, but it was probably a team that we could either beat easily or could easily get beaten. I'm not sure. But then I said, well, fine. And then, it was as some say, it was a knee slapper for all these guys, that I knew that, hey, there's old Bill Vining. He's going to dress out. What is this for? Well, I didn't know what it was for. And so I dressed out, and toward the end of the ball game, he said, Vining, come here. Said, go in that right end. I said, wait a minute, Coach. What are you talking about? I ain't even been out here. He said, no. I said, you ought to know enough about right end. Go on in there. Take that right end. I said, okay. So I stepped on that right end, and, all I could remember was you take about 3 steps and square up. And I took my 3 steps and squared up. And I said, oh, man, that guy handed that ball to the halfback, and they're going the other way. I said, I've gotten by this time. But he faked to the fullback coming my way, And usually, they do that, and then the fullback would come out there and just kind of, jaw around with me a minute, and then they said the play's over. In high school, they never did run over you. That one hadn't stopped yet. I was standing there, I wasn't even ready for it because I was relaxed. He through there, and he came up underneath my chin, and he laid me out flat on my back. And it happened to be right in front of our bench. And I could look up and see them, through my eyes. And it was a knee slapper for them. So the referee ran over. He said, son, are you all right? I said, I think so. He said, you think so? What do you mean? I said, man, the guy's already killed me now. I said, what are you going to do with him? He said, well, I ought to kick him out of the game, but if he does that again, I'll get him. Well, get him now. He's going to kill me. I bit a hole completely through my tongue. I mean, when he hit me, it went all the way through. And so when I stood up the next time, I was a college football player. I didn't let anything get within elbow length of me from that time on. I said they play that game different, up here than they did in Eudora. So
from that point on, you were on the football field.
From that point on, he said, okay, I expect you out next year. I knew it was some reason. So I was out and played the next 2 years.
Okay, so when you graduated, what happened the next year? Did you start working immediately? Or?
No, I was in ROTC, and so I knew where I was headed. I was headed to the Army, and more than likely to the Korean War. And so I went in the Army in September. And by the way, I had just gotten married, just a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Prior to that. In fact, we decided to get married prior to my last football game. And that was the time that my wife was kidnapped by Henderson. And prior to the football game, she was elected queen. And we came off the football field and said, your girlfriend has been kidnapped. I said, yeah, she has. Well, man, I went over there. She lived, right over on Cherry Street. So I went over there and tried to find her and couldn't find her. And they said, oh dear. Her mother said she didn't know anything about it, that she didn't know where she was. So, to make a long story short, she was picked up by Coach Walton's daughter, who was a Henderson student. Coach Walton had not coached anymore beyond my first year, here.
Yeah.
And he was in insurance business. And his daughters went to Henderson. So from that, they knew each other because they'd been in school. They called her over to her car as Ann walked home. And when they got to the car, they drug her inside the car. And then they took off with her and carried her to Hot Springs to one of the students' parents and kept her over there. Well, they kept her the first night, and had you not heard of this?
Yes, I have.
Oh, okay.
But I'm interested
Yeah.
in the details that I haven't
Yeah.
heard. Yeah.
Well, then, we all started looking and trying to find her. And so everyone was pretty touchous. And we, those in my car, with about 4 of us, we just passed a bunch from Henderson, met them right down in front of the restaurant downtown, which is no longer there. And they hollered and we hollered. We just both stopped, got out, and did our little fighting for a few minutes, and then kept going. But it was that way. You couldn't hardly say anything because it would break it up into probably a little bit of a fight. Well, she was gone that night, and then the following night. And I wish Ike Sharp was here, and he could tell you what we did next. We heard that she was in the old Caddo Hotel. Did you ever see that hotel?
Yes.
Did you?
Yes.
Well, there was a way to get in the side door. And so we went through the side door of the old hotel, and Ike had his overalls on. And he had slipped his shotgun down into his pants leg. And so the old place, the doors weren't strong enough to lock up anyhow, to lock the doors. And we'd go up there and we'd knock that door open, and he'd stick that shotgun inside it and look and said, nope, she's not here. And then we'd move on to the next one and went all the way through that hotel. She wasn't there. And we heard she was somewhere else. And she wasn't at the radio station where we heard. The guy's name was Tiny Luton, big old guy. And we told him we're coming up. He said, no, you're not. I'm locking this door. Said, we'll come through the door. And but anyhow, he convinced us she wasn't up there. And we didn't do any damage. Then we heard she was in the boys' dorm. Someone had her in that dorm. So the next thing we had to do was try to find how to get in that dorm without getting ourselves shot up. So I pulled up there with my roommate and someone else. Ike still might have been with me, but my roommate was Leon Cowling. And we were sitting there trying to decide, and it's probably old Donnie that drove up in the Coke truck, and he grabbed the truck as stuff and started in. I told Leon, I said, Leon, you just walk up there and grab a case of Cokes, and you can just walk all the way through that dorm, and you can find out what you can. And sure enough, he ran over there, and not a soul asked him, what are you doing carrying Cokes up here on 3rd floor? That the Coke machine's on the 1st floor. But anyhow, he came back, not there. Well, there was so much tension that the presidents apparently made some contact, and they put the word out, get this thing straight. And so she showed up that night, fortunately.
And that would have been right before the game?
That would have been the day before the
The
game.
day before the game?
Yeah. And so we went on with the game because I think they were about to cancel the game, and they said man, we don't want to meet in the middle,
Right.
with both sides, with fist fight.
Right.
So
So she was kidnapped by friends, but she didn't have the chance to call you and tell you it was okay.
no.
Wow.
And the next thing it did, I took her home with me after the game.
Yeah.
And that's when I asked her to marry me. And that kind of meant, when I got out of school, maybe even when I got out of the Army, because I knew I may not even return. Who knows? And she said, that'll be good. Said, what we'll do is, my brother-in-law, Mel, will be home Christmas from the mission field, and I've always wanted him to be the one who did my ceremony. Said, why don't we just get married Christmas? We're talking about, 5 weeks. And I said, oh dear, I don't know, but give me a chance to think. Yeah. So sure enough, we made quick arrangements, got married on December the 24th, and I had several, people up here. That's the only time my dad ever came to the campus, never came up here, and with my stepmother. My mother passed away when I was about 6.5, 7 years old.
Where did you get married?
We got married at her home. It's her home was right next to Sandifer's home here. That big house to facing it to the right.
Okay.
So from that point on, why it was all or none, and so we kept moving.
So you were in the Army for how long?
In the Army for 2 years.
Okay.
Not quite. I was called home from the hospital. No, not. I had just gotten out of the hospital. I was injured in Korea, and then stayed in the hospital about 2 months, and then had been reassigned. And my dad was about to die, and so I got a permission to go home a little bit early. I already had my discharge. I mean my orders to go home, but it would have taken, about 2 months because it takes you that long to get everything ready from there, and then I was going home by ship, and then to get back out. So they flew me home, and I got there 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks before he passed away. But Ann had come down, and we'd had one child, and she had come down from Louisville, where she lived with her sister Lil up there, and at that particular time, she stayed with around when he had his problems, and she was his favorite, so that was good. And
so how did it come up then that you had a chance to come work at Ouachita?
well, first I had to decide whether I was going to get my master's or not. Yeah. And everything I do has got a story. I can't, I know this keeps on and on, but
that's good.
I was I had to take over the farm when my father passed away, and I did the cotton taking up. It was cotton picking time, and so we did that, and we finished with it. And this was in middle of December. We had a man to come down and speak at our church, and he had been a coach previously in McGee, Arkansas, and now he was with the Boys Industrial School at Pine Bluff. And so at the end of his talk in Eudora, he just came to me and he said, "By the way, what are you doing now?" Because he knew of me because having been in the coaching ranks. And I said, "Well, I'm trying to make up my mind whether I'm going to stay in farming and stay here, or whether to go into my master's and maybe go into some sort of teaching and coaching." So he said, "I tell you what," he said, "if you'd be interested at all," he said, "I need you." I said, "For what?" He said, "I have just fired every man I had up there at the Boys Industrial School." And he said, "I've got about 150 boys that I have to lock up and care for every day. And I need help. I now have about 4 people, and I don't have a responsible person, like you, that I can put in that dorm at night, to watch over them and to help me during the day. Because you can sleep during the night, but all those 150 stayed in one room, and the only way out was that one passageway where they said, "You can sleep right here." You think I could sleep there with 150 convicts? That's almost they were youth, but they were tough. But anyhow, I try to shorten this a little bit. I stayed with him about a week, and I told him, I said, "I don't think this is what I'm looking for, and I don't believe I need to stay any longer than I have to. I'll stay with you until you get ready." But I said, "I have checked, and I can get in school at Peabody, beginning about the 2nd of January. And said, "I've got to go home, get packed, get ready to go, And so he said, "I understand." Because I said, "Man, I'm here with these guys. They were fighting with hoes and shovels, and it was something." But so then I went on to Peabody, and I stayed there for that 9 months. And during that particular time, I started looking for a job. And I had interviews set up at 3 places. One of them was Stuttgart. They needed a coach. So I said, "Fine." The other one I knew, and he was at Clarendon, and he had been coach at Lake Village. So he knew me. And the other one was at Ouachita. So I made all 3 of those at the same time. So it's kind of unusual. I went to Clarendon, and the guy said, "I can offer you, about $2,700 a year." And he said, "But you don't need to take this job, because I know you can get the job at McGee at Stuttgart, and that guy can offer you more money." I said, "Well, fine." And so he said, "It's lined up for you to go down there." I went down and talked to him, and he went all over it, and covered, and he said, "And you'll have your master's." And I said, "Yes, sir." I thought that was a good thing. He said, "I wish you wouldn't. I wouldn't have had to pay you so much." I swear. He said, if I hadn't had my master's, he could cut my pay down a little bit. So I said, thank you, and left. I said, I'll let you know. Then I came on to Ouachita and met with Rab, and of course Rab knew I was coming. He's the one kind of set it up for me, and Schultz, and with Schultz was the PE director, a physical education man, and then I went on to the president, who was Dr. Phelps, and this was his, I believe, his second year here. Might even been, probably was his second year, or the end of his first year. So, in talking with him, he said, okay, I'm going to hire you, and you will be head basketball coach and assistant football coach. I assumed he had talked to Rab about all this. So then I went back, over and talked to Rab. I didn't mention, head this or assistant this. I said, but I'll be out of Peabody, in a short time, and I'll make my way down here quick, and we'll get settled, and just the two of us coaching at the time. So I came back and started working in football with him, and then I asked a question about middle of football. I said, by the way, how many do you have back, for basketball? I don't know. And we don't worry about that till football season's over. He said, we don't worry about it. So I said something else about it. He said, well, I don't know. I hadn't decided what I'm going to do, with basketball. I said, he doesn't even know that I'm hired as the basketball coach. And sure enough, I was right. I said, Coach, let me ask you, do you want basketball? Well, I don't know. They hadn't told me I don't have it yet. I said, well, they kind of indicated to me you want it out and that they wanted me to go ahead and take it. Well, we'll worry about that later. I'll check on that. Here I was, the guy I knew, played for him, and it really hurt our relationship because, I worked for him in football, and I would have gone either direction, football or basketball, in my coaching. And I think it hurt a little bit when he found out that he'd already given me the job in basketball. And he began to think, yeah, that young guy, he'll be over here taking my job in football next, So I worked for him about 3 years or so, and then got out and told him one day that I said, Coach, you really don't need me out here, do you? Well, we probably could do without you. So I said, well, why don't I just quit and go on and start basketball? That'd be all right. And then from that time on, then I never did go back until Watkins was hired. And then they wanted me to come back and help Watkins get kind of, started out. So I helped Watkins for about a half a year here during his tenure. And then I've been here ever since.
Okay, I want to come back.
Now we can get back to it.
I want to come back to basketball in just a minute.
Okay.
Let me ask you this: what was Ouachita like? This would have been the mid-'50s. What was Ouachita like then?
Well, we had about 550 students somewhere, give or take, in there. We had really risen to a number higher than normal because we had all the veterans in, and then it slumped back off. But by 1950, we were back to about 550, because we'd been 700 or 800 and then dropped back. Ouachita, I think, was it was good. I could say nothing bad about it. I think our professors were top notch. I wondered how they kept them, because a lot of them were here through, the bad times, and that they were barely making a living. I came at $3,000, a month, and of course that was,
Right.
that was a living at that time. But I know these other guys were all, have been here a long time, and they were still just making the same thing, and it was a difficult situation for them here. But we had probably one of the best history teachers, that you would find in the country. Dr. Seward, one of the best math teachers, if you could understand him. Yeah, I had trouble understanding him a little bit, but he was, he was great. I majored under him and enjoyed it. But the teachers were good. English teachers, man, we had, I think, some of the finest. So, and we were participants in any and everything, just like any other school. You didn't even know the difference. Like we see now, we see a difference in the state school and the private school, and especially in numbers. You see a lot of difference there. But
Now with 500 or 600 students, the faculty, I guess, was smaller. It was
Yeah.
a close-knit group of
yeah,
people.
very close. That was the point I was going to make, and I already forgotten it. But in fact, we had several, meetings, not faculty meetings, but we had several recreational times together, and we'd go out to someone's area, someone's house, and and you could have a good picnic or a good time together, and we did a lot of this. And Dr. Phelps, of course, was the one. My second year here, came here in '54. I had just been out of Ouachita 3 years when I returned. And he is the one in about '55 that decided that he would knock off that farm and then draw a map and put the roads out there and mark off some lots. And then there were approximately 18 faculty at the time at the original drawing. I'd like to know sometime what the original number was, but I think it was something like that. I know I remember my number was, we drew lots to see, what lot, literally what lot that we had a choice of, that we preferred. And my number was 7. And I did not get my choice, which was where you lived up there. Is there 2 houses?
Uh-huh.
2 houses. Well, I chose that first house. Wayne Smith, I think, chose that, and so I chose the one where I am, and really have been, completely satisfied with it. And we debated whether we could build or not, because it was going to be hard to build and pay an $85 a month rent or payment. When I figured that out, I went back and gave my lot back to him with the idea. He said, "No, just hold it. You may change your mind." And sure enough, I did. And I ended up about the 3rd or 4th house that
was actually
really
good,
was finished, completed there.
A unique thing to live in a neighborhood full of your colleagues at work.
Yeah, yeah, it was good. I thought it was good. The only problem I had was I was right across the street from the president. So I had to act a little more legitimate, than I wanted to. But Dr. Phelps was unique.
Yeah.
He was unique. He was a go-getter. He would jump on that tractor, on that bulldozer, and he'd push Wimpy off of it. No, you're not doing it right, and he'd be on it, and off he'd go. He had his overalls on most of the time himself, but I think he meant well, even though he was pretty harsh at times.
Yeah.
And
I guess things went well for some time before it got worse after that, right?
it did. It did. Right during his latter years, then he was the type that he thought that they ought to, when he hollered jump, he thought they should jump. And he had his chance to fire me because I didn't jump high enough, and I probably should have. In fact, I told him one day, I said, "You're pushing it," and I said, "There's some things you need to work on yourself." He called me over to help him work on the boy's bicycle. So while I was working for it, then the subjects came up, and I'd had a chance. Never did have to look him eye to eye. Always working down here, and
Yeah.
but went over these things. But it was interesting under him because he had one way, and that was his way.
Now, I only knew him when I was a child.
Yeah,
So I didn't know him well at all. But the feeling I had about it was that his style of leadership worked for a while. But as we got into the 1960s and people wanted a little more share
Yeah.
of governance, he just couldn't change.
yeah, that's probably a good thought as far as he's concerned.
Yeah.
I had a point I was going to make, and I've let it slip out of my mind, but maybe I'll think of it in a minute.
What about the neighborhood in the early days? Did you guys gather at
Yeah,
times?
yeah, had real good, groups, and we'd meet together. In fact, Agnes was always the meeting place. Raymond started his house just a little before I did, and then 2 years later he finished because he built it himself, and he was interesting the way he did it.
I hadn't thought about this before, but your experience in some ways is kind of similar to mine in that when you came back to work at Ouachita, you were working with people that had been your professors. You wound up being a neighbor of Dr. Seward, who had been your professor.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, it wasn't bad. Only a few of those that were my professors ended up building out in that area.
Right.
Of course, Raymond wasn't here. He came the same year I did.
Yeah.
And Jane Quick came a year or two later. She and another girl that worked for us came. And just as I go around, Wayne Smith
Yeah.
was not here.
Yeah.
And
When did Riley come?
Riley must have come later because he did not build his house.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that was built by the, by the religion professor,
Okay.
and Joe McLean.
Okay.
Good fella.
Okay.
Good fella. You wouldn't know he was a religion professor. But Joe was a good man. He and I became real good friends, and did everything went good. And then the Scotts built,
Yeah.
down on the corner
Yeah,
there,
I remember them.
and of course the Holts. Man, I tell you, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Dr. Yeoman was here, I
The house
think.
where I live, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think. And then
Yeah.
Ben Elrod
right.
lived there for
Right.
next
Right.
time.
Yeah, I don't remember Dr. Yeoman, but
Yeah. Yeah.
my memory, I guess by the time Mom and Dad built their
Yeah.
house, my memory was that the Elrods were
Yeah.
in the house where we are now.
I was trying to think.
But what's
Oh.
interesting to me about that is that all those people teach in very different areas. I mean, you got a drama person, political science
Yeah.
person, the basketball coach, a variety of different things at Ouachita, but Ouachita maybe being a little bit smaller
Yeah.
and all of you living near each other, you interacted all over campus.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
It was interesting. I can recall, out at a some farmhouse, that we'd meet out there, sit on the bales of hay and perform, act crazy, and of course we're a long way from that now. But it was enjoyable,
Mhm.
getting knowing, and it was a close knit group.
Yeah. All right, go back to basketball for a minute. You said at one point you could have gone either way, football or basketball as your main sport. When did it become clear to you that basketball is something that you were really going to invest your career in?
I think probably about once I became head coach
Okay.
in basketball,
Yeah.
then you that takes your time, and you have to spend your time preparing, for that one deal. Whereas assistant, he hands you, what you are to do for
Right.
the day, and so you're not nearly so involved in the preparation time for it if you're an assistant. Sometimes you'd like for your assistants to be a little bit more, involved in that. But a lot has to do with the head coach, how much he requires of you to get prepared for practice or, whatever in the future.
Well, what I know that you're known for is that you didn't just accept whatever the game plan of that particular day was, but that you were very inventive and that you did a lot of work in terms of exactly what kinds of plays you wanted to run and how you wanted to set up against other teams and to prepare your guys for that kind of thinking man's game, I guess. So was that an immediate thing that came to you, or did that happen gradually over time?
Probably started early because I spent a lot of time. I told my wife several times, I said, do you know what? I am spending all of my life, on a drawing board, on a tablet that will be thrown away, no good to anyone, because no one can understand what I'm writing down here except me, and my memory is so bad that I have to write it 100 times to remember it myself. I'm serious about that. Well, I'm terrible. But I tell you, it as far as being a little bit different, I tried to emulate some other teams and some other coaches and their philosophies. And I can't point to any. I did one which was, we called it the Auburn Shuffle. And I really worked on that and put it in. But I would keep adding, and then I'd change it. Then I eliminated, and I made it one offense. and then I would build another, because this guy and this guy, I need someone that can shoot, that is a good shooter from here. I set my stuff up according to what players I had rather than the otherwise. And then later on, I began to recruit according to what I was running. But the difference is, and I'll always believe this, that I spent the time that it took to get everything down to, the timing to these, what I called them, plays. And I stayed on their back. It is not something that kids would like to run, because I would run them through this stuff, for 30, 40 minutes and never, have but 5 on the floor and make them run through it. And I said, go through it, go through it, go through it. I said, no. And then, of course, I always had my last 5. And oh dear, when I called those, you could see their head drop. They knew what was coming. Yeah, he didn't sleep well last night. He's got a new option. He's got a new play he wants to put in and see how it works. And that's true. But I spent a lot of time and lots of pads on that deal. My coaching was offense during my first years, and it began to take hold, because the first, I didn't even know who was out for basketball. We had no scholarships. We just played whoever was there. I had 2 players my first year, McElmurray and Bone. It was Larry Bone's brother, older brother. And so, and the other boy is McElmurray. I saw him the other day. And so I'd say, okay, guys, said, you 3 guys, you all stand over here, and McElmurray, you drive and see what you can get, and if you don't get a shot, just throw it over your head, and Bone will be following you. Well, I'm making a little bit light of it, but that's about what I had to do. I had to keep these guys out of the way. The more I could keep them from shooting, the better off I was, because they were terrible. But times changed, and about, let's see, that was 54. And in 56, 7, then we started giving some aid. And so I started getting in some players. Yeah. And in 59, then we beat the great Arkansas Tech. They had not lost a game to an AIC school in 10 or 12 years. And it's just, unbelievable. But they had things going their way, and everybody went to Tech that wanted to be a player. Yeah. And if there's a place to go, actually the year that we went to the NAIA National Tournament was in 1962. And they were most all freshmen, because I had been off leave the year before, and I had my GI Bill was going to be out if I didn't go that year.
You had to go back to Peabody.
Had to go back to Peabody.
Yeah.
And to get that done there. And they were pushing me here as well. That my second year, he also gave me the chairman of the physical education department. And I often wondered why, but I knew why, because he didn't want to pay anybody else, and he's already paying me a big salary. He paid me $200 more, so it was good.
Now obviously you had success throughout your career, but you had some teams that were famous in the mid-60s. repeated, great years in the
Yeah.
mid-60s. Tell me about that stretch. That was a stretch where
That was,
you not only were winning games in Arkansas, but you were becoming well known widely in the world of basketball.
yeah, well, that's really kind of when we had our beginning with that group that I recruited in 1961, 61, 62. And they won more games in their period of 4 years here than any other group, that we have had, I'm sure. And I don't have the stats to show it, but they had to. However, that first year, that they were freshmen, then I had decided I was going to play Southeastern Oklahoma, which had just been the national champions, and then McNeese State, which was an NAIA school at one time. I don't think they were then, and they were bad. They were mean. And Stephen F. Austin. There was 3 of the main schools in Texas that were, they were large. They were a step above us. But we played them, and I'm gonna tell you what. They massacred us. When I looked down, I ran the shuffle that first year. And the shuffle cut is one that the man cuts off of a high post, and then you try to pass to him from the other side. So you can get that by that big postman screening for you. So one of the Franz boys, it was Joe's brother, Philip, was playing the 3-man on that cut. So he made his cut, and just as he received the ball, then you could hear, "No cut!" And man, they knocked him down. Okay, he goes to again, and he looked like he's wide open. No cut! I mean, knocked him down, scooted him all the way over, and we jerked him up out from under the bench. Mean, I'm telling you. But you look on those players, and they had blue and black and blue arms all over their bodies, or patches and everything else. They played the game rough. Well, I called timeout, and I said, "Guys, you are not getting the 3 cut, and that's the meat of this total offense. So you've got to get it." I said, "Coach, we can't get it." I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You put on your pants just like they do. If they could get it, you can get it. So you get it." He said, "All right, but somebody's going to get hurt." And he knew who it was. It wasn't going to be them. It's going to be him. Yeah. So needless to say, we lost that game, but not as bad. But during the game, when all this is going on, I still have, I had a couple of 3 freshmen that out of that group that hadn't played, and Kossover was one of them. And as how a coach looks down the line, and most of the time you say, me coach. I'm gonna tell you, their head was on the same string as mine. When I looked down that way, they looked down that way. They didn't want any part. They didn't want any part of that game. And so after that game, I said, "Guys, now I'm going to tell you, we're going to play them again tomorrow night." And I said, "Now you have found out what it takes to play basketball." I said, "They're not nearly as mean as you thought they were, are they?" But I'm not sure I was too convincing on there. But we did play them again, and we ended up getting beat only about 10 or 12 points, which wasn't bad.
It made you ready for the Arkansas team.
That's true. Yeah. And then we go, and I picked up a few things, but the coach, his name is Bloomer Sullivan, an elderly coach. And he'd say, Coach, I'm going to come up to your place next year, and we're going to practice. I said, that's fine. Before season, you come on. I said, that'll help us. So he would come up here about every year, and he would call me, and he said, now, you come over to my room. I want to show you something. And he'd sit down there, and if I was smart enough, I could have learned something, or if I had the ability to determine which line that was drawn, last, because he drew everything on one page. He put it down. Now you do this, you go down, you cut out, and you make a double screen. And when you make that double screen, now you got the referees looking over here. So as you make that double screen, then you got to get rid of that guy, because that's the man you want your guy to shoot. And so you've got to knock that defensive man down. Well, he was serious. And because we that's where we spent the night the year before, down. We were knocked down. But he would come up, and then one day, and I don't use this kind of language, but one day see, Clements stayed with me 4 years, Kossover, Cash, and Bill Neal and friends. We beat them in the scrimmage here. Oh, he didn't like it. I mean, he didn't like it. So he came up to me after the scrimmage, and he said, I'm going to tell you something. He said, now y'all beat me, but I'm going to tell you what I didn't like. And I said, what's that, Coach? He said, you beat me with my own damn stuff. So that's an answer to one of your questions. I said, because we had played him, and he lined up in a tight 1-2-2.
Yeah.
And I put that in, and it worked. It was different from his because I couldn't figure out what all he did, so I did my own.
Right.
But it helped, and we used that offense for years. Yeah. And we used several offenses, but anyhow, yes, I was an offensive coach until, and it never did, it buffaloed me why our opponents did not do things to stop what we were doing. Bothered us, because, the zones were hard for us to work against. So, but they'd still want it. If you ever could get ahead and kind of, get your zone working a little bit, then you were all right. But we found out about, I don't know how far into the coaching, that they're beginning to pick this up. And now I found a school. I went down and played Stephen F. Austin, and I'm telling you what, they ran a defense that I said, you can't even pour a bucket of water through it. I mean, they looked that tough. They ran 5 minutes with this group in a zone, and then they'd turn around and run 5 more minutes in a man. And before we could, take time out and change what we was going to do against the zone, they'd already changed back to a man. Yeah. So I learned a little bit there, and I put that in, and then I reworked it, and then I developed this on my own defense, and it was full court, and we went full court from then on. And when the game started, I said, pick them up when they get off the bus, because we are full court. Mm-hmm. And it looked like they didn't know whether we were in man or a zone, or we'd pick them up at the half and we'd look like we were lined up in a zone at the half, and we were man. And that helped us greatly for a period of time in there. But anyhow, it was a challenge.
Was Robert Cornelius your first African American player?
Yes.
What was it like to go through that transition?
Well, I had one problem, and I really did not recruit Robert. Robert walked on from Camden.
Okay.
I just saw him on campus, and I said, "Hey, do you play basketball?" And he said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, you need to show up over here." College of the Ozarks had a black player the year before, but was not a starter. But Robert became a starter, for me, and did an excellent job. I had some problems. The first problem that I recall was that, what was the name of the little old place up there on the hill where the lady has a suitcase out there in front of it now?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the neighborhood over there.
Yeah, it used to be kind of, she's got a little business up there now.
Right, a tea room.
Yeah, whatever. But anyhow, we came back from a game because, then you couldn't just carry your kids in to eat anywhere. Mm-hmm. And so I said, well, we'll just go back and eat in Arkadelphia. I walked in there and he said, now you all can eat, but this other young man you've got with you can't eat with you. I said, if he can't eat with us, then you'll never see this room darkened by any of us again. I said, you need to grow up. You need to get in times. He didn't give us any trouble, except he just said that's his policy. The other problem that I had was that we went into, I called, we were to go down to McNeese, and I knew it'd be trouble down there in Louisiana. So I needed to eat about Shreveport. Jerry Kossover was in Shreveport. So I called Jerry, and I asked him to find me a place that I could eat and bring two. I also had Tommy Patterson. Tommy Patterson was probably the best player we've ever had here. And so as we stopped, ready to go, down there, but as we stopped for me to call Jerry to find out where he had us a place, well, I didn't pay any attention to where I was stopping because I saw the phone on the outside of the wall. But just as you get into Bossier City, there's a place there that's kind of a honky-tonk. And, I wish I could remember that place, but we were talking about it the other night. But anyhow, we were in 3 cars, and the other 2 cars didn't see me, when I went to the phone. They got out and went in the building. And so when I got through talking with Jerry and him telling me where to go, then here come the other 2 carloads. They come walking back out of the restaurant. I said, what are y'all doing? What are you doing out of your cars? They said, Coach, this is just exactly like they said it. Said, Coach, he told us they don't serve niggers in here. And I said, well, you shouldn't have been in there in the first place. You get yourself back in that car. Now, from now on, you listen to me, and you ask before you do anything. I said, we're in Louisiana, and you listen to what I say. I'm trying to get their mind, off of that. So we went on, and as we stopped and walked across that parking lot to the place where we were going to eat, then I was swinging my arms, and every time I'd swing it, I'd hit Tommy Patterson. Tommy was the other black kid. I'd hit Tommy Patterson. I said, Tommy, would you walk over there? I said, what's the matter with you? Said, you're not worried about it. He said, Coach, I'm going to tell you, he said, and we had a little trouble finding. He said, "You may get lost, I may get lost, but one thing's for sure, we gonna get lost together." And that's what he meant too. But that didn't last very long. You know, that straightened out, you know, pretty quick.
Now, was there kind of an understanding among the schools in Arkansas that everybody was going to do this about the same time?
No,
Or did it just happen?
just happened.
It just came together.
Yeah, just happened. And it took a while for some to do this. But it was Robert did a good job, and then Tommy came along behind him, and he was about 6'7", and a little bigger than Robert. Robert's about 6'5", but he was a leaper.
Yeah.
And
I remember seeing him play.
did you?
Yeah.
And then he stayed with me 3.5 years. He got ineligible, got a little anxious his last year, and got in a little. He didn't get in really any trouble, but some of the things he was doing, it kept him from doing his work.
Yeah.
And then Tommy Patterson, of course, went 1 year and got ineligible, and then went in the Army, and then came back from the Army, and then played another year, and then made All-American here, and then was drafted. And I say drafted, I'm not sure that, anyhow, he was taken. He was taken. And it was against my better judgment, because I had told Robert, I said, "Robert, now you may go up there." They called me and asked about him, and asked me to come with him. And I said, "No, I can't I can't leave now." But I said, "He can come if you'll assure me that you will not sign him up there." "Well, don't you worry, Coach, we won't do anything you don't want." Well, I told him, I said, "Robert, you or not Robert, Tommy. It's fine if you go on, but you do not sign anything. If they give you something, you bring it back here, and I'll look at it. I want to make sure if you want to sign something that I can see it." Well, he got up there, and then they called me, and it was the SID, but same. And he said, "I want the stats on Tommy Patterson." I said, "Why do you want the stats on Tommy Patterson? He's just visiting." He said, "Well, as far as I know, they're planning to sign him this afternoon." I said, "No, they don't plan to sign him. They will not, because he told me he would not sign him." So I said, "You get the head coach and get him on the phone." And he did. And he said, "Well, now, Coach, I'm gonna tell you now, I did not pressure this deal, but I talked to Tommy, and I said, 'Tommy, we are willing to sign you.' And it said, 'What is your situation?' He said, 'Well, Coach told me that I could not sign unless I got 5 times what he is receiving at Ouachita.'" Well, of course, I was just throwing out a figure, because I said surely they wouldn't pay him. I don't know what the salary was at that time, but I can't even remember what mine was. It was probably about 5,000.
Yeah.
So they paid him 50,000. No, that'd be 10 times, wouldn't it?
Right.
Well, anyhow, I don't even know what it was, but
So who was?
you shouldn't have asked me.
The Bullets, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, you're right.
Baltimore Bullets?
Whichever they
were called at the time.
Yeah.
Did he play with Unseld, Wes Unseld? I think so.
Wow.
Like Tommy Patterson is in the hospital in Camden, Arkansas.
Is it?
His second year, he got on drugs up there and did not play but 2 years. And Robert has done well and has a good job and wife.
Good.
Of course, that,
Jim, I only got about 3 minutes left, okay?
okay.
Okay, good.
Change, take the wrap up.
We might wanna go a little more than 3 minutes.
Okay, we gonna get another